there's this alien intrusion of mimetic alien species that essentially has it out for us. They're jealous of us. They want to penetrate, and they penetrated into like you could say they've probably been here since the beginning. We don't know how long humanity goes back. It might even go back millions of years. We've seen civilizations, traces of them come and go. But in this recent round, he traced it to like about 4,000 years ago that they penetrated into the neural network of the human species. They did this through getting into the mind of Abraham, you could say, and they put into that into the dopamine circuits the idea of master race ideology, in a sense, like chosen race. You're going to get rewarded if you work with us. And so they began to penetrate into civilization, and it took thousands of years for it to kind of like spread into the world.
Right now on Higher Journeys with Alexis Brooks. Welcome, everybody, to Higher Journeys with Alexis Brooks. Of course, I am your host, Alexis Brooks. And each and every week, well, these days it's been every other week, because as you know, I've been doing my conscious commentary segments sort of in the middle, but on the back end and forefront, I have guests on the show. And it's always a pleasure to have a first-time guest, one that I know very well, one that I bet you know the name. And if you don't, you're missing something. His name is Frank Jacob. He's joining us for the first time all the way from Germany. Yes, is that where you are at the moment, Frank?
Hi, Alexis. Yes, I am in the Republic of Germany, even though it's not really a republic, but yes, I'm in Germany.
I love it. We're going to bring up Germany actually within the context of the conversation we're going to be having today. Guess what we're going to be talking about today, guys? Did you see my conscious commentary last week where I kind of touched on the recent passing of Sissy Houston and all of the, let's just call it wonkiness that sort of surrounded my interfacing, my experience of learning about her passing, or even before? Did you? Question mark. We'll put a little I card up just in case you haven't. Well, we're going to kind of have a conversation on the heels of that, guys. It has to do with, probably you guessed it, artificial intelligence, also known as AI. But we're not going to just touch the surface. We're not going to just scratch the surface like I did. We're going to go deep with Frank, because Frank, as a filmmaker, independent filmmaker, a hell of a researcher, a guy who I think came out of his mother's womb in order to do the work he's doing right now. And that is to find the truth, connect the dots, and share with as many people as possible for the highest good of all of us. Frank, I'm delighted to have you here, because we are going to go into a serious subject, not just touching on AI, but going deep into what is really going on. So before we get started, I'd love for you to give us just a little thumbnail of how on earth or off you got involved in this work.
Well, thank you for having me here, Alexis. It was wonderful to meet you in the summer or spring this year. And I guess this is the first continuation of that encounter. And that's a question that's pretty loaded. I mean, where does it start? When I think back on it, I look at my baby pictures. I've already got kind of some kind of a grimace on my face. Like, I'm like, here I am, like, I've got to figure this out. Right. And I think it was around 12 or so, I started reading into books that kind of threw off my picture of reality a lot. I think at that age, one of the books that profoundly affected me was a book on Hiroshima, right? So I was reading about how mankind was able to, melt, hundreds of thousands of its fellow citizens on this planet in cold blood, at the, at the whim of some of its political leaders. And I realized then that, oh my God, where have I landed, right? On an insane planet almost. That's kind of where I was going in the very beginning, in that direction. And then I found all kinds of stuff like, G. Edward Griffin was one of those people. I found cassettes back then. They still had cassettes, and there were these talks he was giving way back then already, right?
Oh, yeah.
And from him, I think I somehow stumbled on a guy, an American researcher called John Judge, and he was talking about the work of Mae Brussel and all this archival research material that pointed at Jonestown and the Kennedy assassinations. And it was fascinating stuff. And I realized then that I'd love to look under the hood. And I was the youngest in the family. My sister had she's older, and she had a boyfriend. And he kind of got me into athletics, into sports. And, when you're young and that, you're into the physical activity. And it turns out, though, that he was somewhat of interested in metaphysical stuff. And so when we used to go jogging and working out at night, he started bringing up things like a guy called Carlos Castaneda.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, for me, that was like, a 14-year-old or 13, 14-year-old, that was like a gold mine for my imagination. That led into Seth material and all this other kind of stuff. So I was, a psychonaut pretty much early on, right?
Yeah.
And then I got into the arts. And I realized that the arts, was a fascinating way to explore your creative abilities. And, my goal then became to become a rich and powerful rock star so that I could then use that esoteric knowledge and then drop info bombs into the world.
I love it.
Using my personality and influence.
With
right?
the Hiroshima, right? Starts with the bomb analogy.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Info bomb. So then I was like, okay, well, I didn't make it quite into the rock star scenario. I tried, a good long time. But I learned a lot on the way, and I learned a lot about production. I learned a lot about multimedia and producing. To this very day, I'm very thankful that I went that route, because I morphed ultimately into a filmmaker, multimedia artist. And then, with the advance of technology and the democratization in terms of cost point of this, of equipment, I was able to get my hands on good enough equipment to make cinematic representations of the information and the ideas that I wanted to see out there, which I wasn't seeing. And I guess that led to some of the first films that people knew about me from were Solar Revolution, which is about how consciousness is affected by the cosmos, which Tanya Maidenford and I did with a German biophysicist called Dieter Brers. And then while I was doing that film, actually preceding that film, I wanted to do a film that I eventually came out with the name of Packing for Mars. And that was a film about a breakaway civilization that had established colonies on Mars. And it was based on a book called Alternative 3. And some, homeopathic farmer dude that I ran into along the path where I was a vegetarian and into nutrition and all this stuff, that's all part of my another chapter kind of thing. He sort of put this book in my hand and said, this is a fiction book, but it's the truth, right? So I thought, okay, I took it and I read it. It reads rivetingly well. Like the author, Leslie Watkins is like a Fleet Street journalist. So he put together a book that seemed real, like very real. And that researcher I mentioned earlier, Mae Brussel, later even said that it was the most dangerous book in her library. So this kind of brought me into the deep end of stuff, right? So here I was living in the mainstream world, right, amongst mainstream people. I even worked at a mainstream network, doing editing and producing of shows and things. But to get this material out there, I hadn't really seen it out there in the way I envisioned it yet. So that was the goal of Packing for Mars. We did get it out there. That's where I met Tanya Maidenford, and we've sort of been working on explorations of cinematic ventures ever since. We've produced a lot of shows. We've even done stuff for Gaia. But we're highly and defensively independent, fiercely independent, because we don't want to be censored.
Right.
And so this has evolved now for the last, I guess, 10, 15 years into more and more refined and deeper levels of intel. And that's, I guess, the really quick nutshell version of where I am now and how I got here.
You did that quite well. And look, when you ask a question like that, I'm sure not only guests, but just people that are interested in this stuff have to take a deep breath and go, oh boy, here we go down the rabbit hole of how I got here. It's interesting, just as a little footnote, that we share a lot of similar paths in terms of the chronology. My being immersed in the Seth material, vis-a-vis, get this, my mother had Seth Speaks on her shelf, and that started me down a whole path. Kind of grew up in an alternative household. Another story for another time, but also coming from the mainstream of media as well, in radio back in Boston. But yeah, it's typically, I say I've had several professional and personal incarnations, and somehow we landed here, not by accident, Frank. Well, your path has led you to some very important insights, and I want to get into that in short order. Where shall we start? You saw my conscious commentary. I call it sissy/AI, the AI, whatever that was. I wanted to bring you up and sort of tease our show coming up, because you and I had a conversation prior to my recording that episode, and you brought up some super fascinating things just in the names themselves. Took me down a rabbit hole, one of which was called sentient world simulation. And actually, if you saw my episode, you know that I was able to go to our friend, I say that somewhat facetiously, ChatGPT, to get a little insight as to what that was all about, or what it is all about, because I believe it's still going on, right? SWS.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Give me some of your thoughts. I want to talk about the sissy episode first, and forgive me for using that name. That's really kind of how I identify with the impetus for why I did that. But give me some insights, Frank, if you would, on your view of SWS. Was it connected to Event 201? Is that
No,
part?
it isn't actually directly that I'm aware of.
Really?
Because it was actually begun in 2006 at Purdue University, so it goes back and predates a lot of those programs. But when you start to look at all that material, you realize that there's a lot of synchronicity between those different factions, right?
Absolutely.
And I mean, I essentially have, my film on Mars, of course, dealt with a little bit of the stuff about a breakaway civilization. However, when I was interviewing Bill Ryan for that film and Carrie Cassidy, Bill touched on, he called me up, I think it was afterward, and mentioned something, if I'd heard about it, called Looking Glass, Project Looking Glass. And it turns out Tanya also knew quite a bit about Project Looking Glass and certain people involved. And I thought it was intriguing and interesting. And I kind of sort of put it into, interesting. I'm going to stick it in this drawer for reading later. And I didn't really do much with it until about 10 years later. I stumbled on a sort of a group of mysterious Intel white hats, or whatever they wanted them to call themselves, like just insiders that emerged suddenly out of the blue 10 years after the whole Looking Glass project narrative had kind of died down or disappeared. They called themselves the Guardians of the Looking Glass, and they started to release these very, very potently worded video essays about events that were coming that they had seen in the Looking Glass data. And it was the kind of stuff where, like, I sat up and took notice, because I'm like, well, I'd just been doing sort of webinars or discussions with my biophysicist friend Dieter Burrs on timelines and parallel universes and things like that. So I thought, okay, this is an interesting story. And I was kind of sitting there and waiting for the usual suspects to jump on it. The ones that usually tell these, like the Wilcoxes and whoever else, that usually were the ones that actually broke this stuff in the beginning. And nobody was taking up, was taking the lead. So I'm like, okay, well, you know what? I'm gonna, there's an email there. I'm gonna contact them, and I'm gonna, just write a story on it and see what happens, see where it takes me. And that opened up a whole new, I didn't realize, the can of worms I was going to open there. And, the article I wrote got picked up the day it was released. It was released in a German portal, because I wrote it in German originally. And John Nolan on Inspired Channel, who's an expat from Germany, I think, or knows some German, he went to the portal where that was at that day by total coincidence. And he had a video circulating about one of the protagonists of the first chapter of that Looking Glass project, called Bill Wood, on his channel. So he contacted me, and we started doing a series of talks on the emerging messages from this Looking Glass Guardians group. Right. And that just went viral, exploded.
I know. That's how I found you, by the way.
Right. And so, we were looking at this stuff and trying to break it down, not just at face value, but trying to look at the 40,000 foot perspective, bringing in some of my research, the metaphysical aspect of it. And it really caught on, and it sort of led me down into a rabbit hole, I guess, for lack of a better word, into a lot of this material again. And while I was researching all that, I got crazier and crazier and crazier, because the whole subject of transhumanism is deeply tied into it as well. And when I explored that story, I was willing to go to down all the crazy roads, just to try all this stuff out and see how it fits and see how it feels, how it resonates with me. And, you come into things like you mentioned them, Geordie Rose, the D-Wave, CERN, all these things come up, and you find out that there's this drive toward artificially penetrating our world by certain individuals who seem to be aligned with certain forces. And, if you really want me to break this down to kind of where I'm at now with the source of it, if we have time for that, I could lay it out for you kind of in a very interesting way. So, just to see how it works with you and maybe the audience as well, right? Because
Please do.
I think I've done a lot of the same groundwork a lot of other people have done. But it's interesting because in this year, in the course of this year, starting in the spring, I ran into an interesting discussion somebody was having on simulation. And he was talking with a guy called John Lash. And I'm like, I've never heard of this guy, John Lash, before. And I had no idea of this guy's work, right? And so I was like, wow, this guy's got some really good points, And again, it was one of those things where I put it in the drawer for later, and then all of a sudden, it just came kind of like, how sometimes thoughts come back to you again and again, like something nags at you and says, like, taps you on the shoulder, look at this again, look at this, right? And I was actually in the middle of trying to devise the game plan for my upcoming webinar, which is now out, but it was still upcoming back then. And I was looking at historical narratives. And I know that in my work with Looking Glass, I came across a lot of distortions in the historical narrative that have led to new timelines. And lo and behold, it turns out that this guy, John Lash, has done about 30 years of mythological research going back to the source material.
That's right.
Of something written in the earliest remaining or surviving bound books that we have on the planet, something called the Nag Hammadi. And you're nodding, so obviously you're familiar with it, right?
I'm familiar, and I'm familiar with John Lash as well. He was actually on the scene a little bit more years ago when he's kind of disappeared, but continue.
Well, we can, he's still out there. He's definitely very active, and I'm thankful for that. I didn't know any of his work before, and when I began to delve into his work, essentially what I really liked about it is that he went back to that material and uncovered the source of, you could say, this intrusion, this alien intrusion. And he's the guy that actually coined the name for this alien influence. He called them the Archons. And he did it so long ago that, nobody probably doesn't even know that he's the guy that coined that term originally.
I didn't either. Okay, let's stop for a second. John Lash is the one that coined the term the Archons. I thought that came directly from the Gnostic tradition.
Well, it did, but nobody was putting it out there, right? And nobody was, the people that were looking at the Gnostic material, Alexis, they were framing it in terms of the Abrahamic religions. So they were using, because these Nag Hammadi codices had a lot of material that overlapped with ancient biblical texts. So people that were biblical scholars took the Gnostic material and looked for the sources and traces of their ideology in the Gnostic writings, without realizing that that the Gnostics themselves, who actually don't even call themselves Gnostics, they call themselves telestai, and they're meaning to aim. And they were aiming for the truth. And they had collected like thousands of years of data of writings and wisdoms and transcendental experiences. And they had documented the stuff. And when the Abrahamic religions came out, they protested them. They were against the salvationist meme of slave, like master race ideology. And essentially what I like about John's work is that he kind of he looked at it neutral. He just looked at what was there in terms of if these Gnostics weren't Christians? What if they were just an independent group? In fact, they were. And so because of that, you find out that there's this alien intrusion of mimetic alien species that essentially has it out for us. They're jealous of us. They want to penetrate, and they penetrated into like you could say they've probably been here since the beginning. We don't know how long humanity goes back. It might even go back millions of years. We've seen civilizations, traces of them come and go. But in this recent round, he traced it to like about 4,000 years ago that they penetrated into the neural network of the human species. They did this through getting into the mind of Abraham, you could say, and they put into that into the dopamine circuits the idea of master race ideology, in a sense, like chosen race. You're going to get rewarded if you work with us. And so they began to penetrate into civilization, and it took thousands of years for it to kind of like spread into the world, essentially, because as we know, the Abrahamic religions in the form of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam have pretty much become the three powerful dominant majority religious force in the world. I mean, there's a few smaller fringe groups, and the Far East, the Hindu, the Buddhist, but they're not nearly as prevalent and powerful as the Abrahamic ones, right? So what's interesting is if you look at that material, there's actually this is the wild part, because he was actually able to find dialogues between the Gnostic masters or the telestai and teachers, the mystery school teachers, teaching Gnostics about these archons. There's even a specific dialogue where they tell them they're going to come and they're going to attack you. And when they attack you, this is what you do. Did you know that? It's really well. I can put it up on the screen here. I'll give you a couple of sentences.
I want you to do that. He's got some slides for us. I'm really excited, but my eyebrow is a little bit furled, not because I'm disagreeing, but it's just so interesting that I'm hearing a few things. Obviously, I am familiar with the archonic influence as it relates to Gnostic stories. However, it gets so mind-boggling, Frank, when you think about the history of how we ended up where we are. And I'm reminded of the Anunnaki as well.
Right.
And the sort of secret history that Billy Carson's doing amazing work revealing some of that, and also alludes to this sort of influence of control, and that we are perhaps the descendants of Anunnaki, but as a slave race that not only did they infiltrate, but perhaps created us. But now we're juxtaposing
I'm aware of that.
Okay. But juxtaposing that with the archonic influence and the story, the way you're sharing it, I just wonder where the two sort of cross over or intersect or relate.
Well, you're probably not going to like what I say about that.
Go for it. No.
Because the Sumerian writings and the Anunnaki story is a story that's based on the slave race ideology as well. And if you follow the work of the Gnostics, who are writing this stuff down, the true Gnostics, they were talking about a totally different creationist narrative, one involving aeons, and one aeon in particular named Sophia, a feminine, energetic, plasmic consciousness emerging from the center of the galaxies, which is where these aeonic beings, these plasma gods, if you want to call them, but aeons is a more accurate way, and that's how the Gnostics describe it, emerged. And Sophia, as an aeon, did something unprecedented by plunging into the experiment, leaving the center of the pleroma, as it's called, the safe zone, and heading into matter, the Dema, as it's called, dense material realm. And as she did that, two things that are profound happened. One is the archonic species was inadvertently and by accident generated. They preceded mankind, humanity. Humanity is called the Anthropos. The Anthropos experiment includes humanity and all of its symbiotic relationships to all of life. And the other thing that's interesting is that Sophia herself, searching for a habitat for this anthropic experiment, this Anthropos, ended up becoming or transforming into the planet in the middle of this solar system that had been created by the archons, who are a mimetic species. So right in the middle of this you could say negative or envious or artificial Yahweh-driven narrative of the reptilian archontic world is Sophia on the planet. And then we emerged on this planet in the middle of this. And so since the very beginning, there's been this dance between the archons trying to penetrate into the experiment and to corrupt the experiment, because they see the difference, the deficiency of between them as a species only able to copy and mimic, and the human species able to create. We were given what's called nous, as the archons, as the Gnostics call it, which means we have we've been divinely endowed with these special skills of creativity. And so we are the crowning of that experiment that was invented or designed by these aeons. Thelety is the male part, Sophia is the female part. And so the stories that came along after, like the story of the Anunnaki and things, these ideas that there was an alien species that created or mixed with our genetics or manipulated our genetics, this is a false narrative, because it's trying to get us to believe the idea that we're a slave species and that we're on a prison planet and we have to get off, like this idea of the divine spark, which comes out of the Talmud, by the way, not out of the Gnostic teachings. These terms and stuff all base the idea that we are a slave species on a prison planet, and that and even the false Gnostic teachings, the Christian-based teachings, go in that direction, that we need to get away from here. When in fact, exactly the opposite is true. This is where I'm going more and more lately. Even though I've gone all those roads too, I'm starting to believe, what a misleader that would be. When in fact, we as humans are supposed to be realizing our fullest potential. We've been given all these creative, powerful, divine abilities, these endowments, right? Reasoning. What we're doing right now is one of them, the fact that we have thought and reflection, and we have all these special abilities, and we're being blocked. We haven't even really fully realized them. And all these narratives are getting in the way, telling us, oh, you're slaves. Oh, there's this Yahweh God, and all these off-planet beings have come and they control. They're better than us. And yet, this is what's interesting, there's really the only evidence of it that I've been able to find, Alexis, and I put it into my time capsule, into my Tale of Two Timelines webinar, which is talking about the Looking Glass project, is the J-Rods. Those recordings of the J-Rods, those little ET gray species aliens, are pretty much like all there is. The rest of it out there is really badly garbled and looks like fake, and it probably is fake for the most part. And now with AI, I mean, a lot of UFO things that are out there are faked. There's so much fake information, and there's all these probes sending radio signals out into the universe in all directions, and nothing is coming back. Okay, now of course some people say, well, that's a conspiracy because NASA, never a straight answer. They're controlling all this stuff. Exactly, but the communication that I've found that's happening, and I've just done a film on it called The Extraterrestrial Species Almanac. All those people who claim to have contact with ETs, well, it's astral. I mean, I don't see them anywhere. There's no pictures of them anywhere. They're not present here. And what's interesting in the archontic literature is that they talk about the archons looking like a sort of an aborted feces, like a human being with a large head and the bug eyes, the way kind of like a baby looks. And if you look at those grays, they look like that. And they have that appearance, right? And so they have both the ability to penetrate mentally and to penetrate physically to a degree, but never permanently. And it's interesting now, when I go back a couple of years and reflect on the Tale of Two Timelines webinar about Looking Glass, and they had these discussions with these J-Rods who were saying they were future humans from 45,000 and 52,000 years respectively, P52s, P45s. The discussions all took place where? In a clean sphere, right? Dan Burrish talks about them getting geared up in heavy suits and going into special capsules and being pushed towards something called a clean sphere, because the temperature inside this clean sphere was icy cold with very little oxygen. A human being would not survive in there very long at all. So, it's interesting. So all I can say, it's an interesting thought to think, maybe they weren't future humans. Maybe they were archons lying to us, because the archons are famous for inventing and lying, or, because, like in all of time, like if you look at consciousness, and how we manifest into bodies, there's something called wave structure of matter, which I go into a lot in one of my other webinars, which is how the idea of how waves become particles. It's a conundrum, right, that they've been trying to solve. Well, if you look at it that way, if waves become consciousness, these waves, scalar waves, basically they have to pre-exist matter, which means they pre-exist time. So that means at some point outside of physicality, there is no time, which means that there is also a future time, and that future time also deposits and accesses the same field source of information that we do in our time. So it's not out of the ordinary to think that humanity could have invented time travel in the future, and that the archons took that technology and used it to come back here and to begin to try and mess with us here. Because let's not forget, that's what they're trying to do. Okay, so I'll rest right there for now.
Okay, I had to let you go. I was there's a lot to take in there. Look, this isn't we don't want to do it back and forth, because I think to be honest, I think it all are elements, semblances of all of it could be on the table. I always say it's not this or that, but probably this and that. Talk about parallel realities, all of it could be on the table. But I want to come back to a point that you made about one of the more notorious characteristics of the archonic influence that many of us know, and that is their inability to create and their brilliance at copying. And I want to draw a nexus point, Frank, between that as being their primary motive, not motive, but how they operate, with how AI is operating. It only knows how to copy and regurgitate, not create. So now let's bring in that whole dynamic into this conversation. And it may very well be making the case for an archonic influence undergirding why AI is so prevalent right now.
Well, yes, this is interesting, because I was looking at some of my my data, and there's a like, look at the situation with the Ross, like the Dan Burish talked about how the communication began with the J-Rods after the crashes that began commencing in 1947 in the United States, with Roswell and a series of other crashes, and Kingman, Arizona, etc. And they ended up capturing these J-Rods and having these conversations with them. And what's interesting is you find out that there is this, obviously this species hovering around us. And the question is, were the J-Rods that were shot down, and you got to ask yourself, if it's an advanced technology, how would they be shot down by lesser advanced species like humans, right? One of the possibilities is it was a Trojan horse. They allowed themselves to penetrate into our world for a specific reason, maybe to anchor something in here on a physical level. But here, check this out. I wanted to show you this. I'll show you this slide, okay?
Okay.
This is something that happened in 1957. Sputnik went into space and created the first satellite around the planet. And it was bizarre, because they found that all of a sudden they picked up signals that were coming toward Earth from outer space. They found that there was radio transmissions coming from outer space to Earth. And it was such a shock to them that they formed a group around this knowledge and tried to figure out what exactly it is, right? And so they created something called the Intergalactic Computer Network. And here's a paper from April 25th, 1963, documenting that organization. And that organization began to study something that was happening, where they figured out there were these transmissions coming when they sent the Cassini probes out to Saturn. There were these transmissions coming from Saturn.
Was that part of the?
That maybe is part of the sound that was coming from Saturn. I don't know.
Okay, that was just too uncanny. Was that?
So, we're getting kind of the goosebumps there. But what's interesting is that once they figured that out, they figured out that frequencies can affect consciousness. And that kind of was the beginning of it. So we now know that for the last minimum 70 years, yeah, and I've got some documents here that show that they talk about this, right, at the CIA, that for at least 70 years they have been working on how to hack into human consciousness using frequencies. And so it gets really interesting because you realize that essentially what's happening is that they've figured out that the human body is receptive to the biological organism, that is receptive to manipulation from frequencies. Now, this is the very foundation of, I'm getting to where your sissy story is, because I'm trying to lay the foundation for what it might be technically. Because look, it's really hard to explain this stuff just like, yeah, well, it's cool, I had that experience, and that must be some interstellar or galactic thing. I mean, it's very esoteric, right? But what I'm showing you here are actual evidences that show you that there was the development of psychological warfare for over 70 years, and this is the foundation of what has led to artificial intelligence, right? So you got to ask yourself, what is an intergalactic network of people with what? Who are they talking with, right? Could this be this influence that is coming from this archontic side, right? So, we have documents here that are from 1964 that show us, we can see here essentially that the experiments have been going since the 1930s of how to get into and crack into the human mind. A lot of it was dealing with pineal gland, right? And the thalamus, right? And, I remember seeing an interesting talk that Billy Carson did about the pineal gland and the brain structure and the thalamus and the pituitary gland. And he did this sort of cesarean slice of the human brain and superimposed the eye of Horus over top of it. And you see that essentially that information that the brain has this sort of all-seeing eye, or this super sensitive ability, extrasensory paranormal ability, seemed to have already been known by the ancients, and that they had this information that they could actually work with or expand on.
Right. So I want to interject something in terms of, because there's so much controversy around the pineal gland, not so much its capability, but its calcification, if it's happened or not. There's a camp that says, certainly with all of the impediments that we're taking in, not the least of which is fluoride and other things, will calcify, and the water supply, by the way, over time, the pineal gland. There's another camp that's emerged, even within the alternative space, that says that that's BS, and there are other reasons for the atrophied pineal gland. What are your thoughts on that?
We are living at a time of great challenge and incredible opportunity. A time when taking life into our own hands, charting our own course, and finding our own answers is more accessible than ever before. During this time, you may be asking yourself, what am I called to do? What if I could discover not only my own inner healing power, but help others all over this planet discover theirs? We all have the ability to heal ourselves, but it takes a special approach, a unique approach. Quantum healing hypnosis technique, also known as QHHT, a method developed by pioneering hypnotherapist and past life regression expert Dolores Cannon, is the approach that thousands have used and taught to access the deeper aspect of the self for healing at the core level. We all have the ability to tap into the higher self, the oversoul, the higher consciousness, and we have the means to help others to do the same. QHHT is designed to help the individual access the subconscious, the storehouse of all information, through visualization at the deepest level imaginable, a process that Dolores Cannon discovered and refined during her decades of working with individuals from around the globe. Training with QHHT will provide the guidance and give you the tools to help others tap that incredible force within. Now, you can access this exclusive training online, bringing the tools needed right to you, so you can assist others in finding their own answers and achieve total healing. This is powerful and needed now more than ever. Be a part of the pioneering work and legacy of Dolores Cannon by learning QHHT. Start today by clicking on the link in the description of this show to get started. And when you do, don't forget to mention Higher Journeys to get a 10% course discount when you sign up. It's time we all take back control of our lives and chart the course for success at every level. It's time to discover the power of quantum healing hypnosis technique by helping others to help themselves. And by doing this, we are helping to heal the world.
Well, yeah, I've went into that as well. And I think that, it's nobody really has the answer here. There's an interesting Gnostic perspective that I've discovered as well recently, while I'm kind of on that side of the tree, on that branch, that explains the atrophy with respect to the male energy, and the male energy being very prevalent at one point, needing to be, and then essentially diminishing. And there's another aspect which talks about that the pineal gland, to be activated, one of the most powerful things you can do, if it is indeed something which you are activating, is to actually focus on it. You can most people don't even know, where their spleen or their gallbladder or their kidneys located, let alone where their pineal gland, that they even have one, and that it's located in the middle of their brain, and that it has a purpose, right? And so a lot has been said. The Dispensa's talked a lot about it, and I did a webinar on it with based on my friend Dieter Burr's material. And there's a lot of material that seems to indicate that the pineal gland has something special, that the three most toxic elements, but not just to the pineal gland, to the human brain tissue, are glyphosate, aluminum, and fluoride. And those seem to be, coincidentally, the three most prevalent toxins in our environment. So interesting that connection is there. Always try to take a step back and think, okay, well, if we accept that narrative that we're being blocked, what if it isn't true? And what if we just, do we need to accept that narrative, where we are, in fact, we're in matter, but we're penetrating matter from other dimensions, right? So we also tap into something called the field, and to bring information into that field, if they can tap into that field like they've learned with respect to their mind control experiments that they started, then that can penetrate your body on multiple levels. And so it doesn't necessarily need to be the pineal gland, but the pineal gland nonetheless is a very, very fascinating subject. And nobody really has the answers. I think it's important to look at all this material and go inside.
Absolutely.
A lot of people forget about that. It's become so intellectual,
Right.
and so like, oh yeah, this is the way it works, and this with this, and these are these chemicals, and this is how yes, but how does it feel, right? And when I think about it, the pineal gland is there to tap into these higher dimensions and to work together with the hippocampus. And the hippocampus generates these things called index neurons every single day. They're fresh. They're out there, they're in your brain, they grab all these new stimulants and things you've experienced, and they take that information and they store it in the cerebral cortex at night when you're sleeping. And then just, in the morning before you wake up, you have something called rapid eye movement. That's when your eyes are trying to make the connections. Your eyes automatically they move because they're trying to figure out where the newest index neurons have connected with older information and make the connections, right? Then you wake up, you've got a fresh batch of index neurons, and it starts all over again, right? So this process has been going on and developing it and creating this ability for you to have ethics and reflection. And if it's true that, we're totally toxic and totally blocked, then, I have to say, if I only look at my own life, right, I don't think that I feel it. Honestly, I feel highly creative, and I feel totally dialed in. And I'm able to tap into things that totally surprise me. I mean, I may not be able to, levitate this glass across the room,
Not yet. Not yet.
But maybe that isn't necessary yet. But I'm able to, I do sense that I have telepathic abilities. I do hear things. And when I'm in a creative mode, like making films, I see pictures, I see picture sequences, I hear the music. And, when I interview people, I'm able to somehow catalog in my brain various conversations and find the connecting dots between them all. So, I mean, it still works. And so I haven't done anything special except, I did take an effort in my life to eat well, to nourish my body with proper nutrition, not eating artificial foods, not eating canned foods, preservatives, all these things. I think if you eliminate all that stuff and you just try to eat as pure as you can, and you keep your thoughts and your mind high, and you have associations with high-minded people and high-minded
Absolutely.
intellectual discussions, you step outside of that realm. So that's all I want to say. I mean, I think that, yes, pineal gland is a factor. Does it have to affect us totally? I would argue that now,
Yeah.
in retrospect
Well,
of everything that I've gone through.
we work as a unit. Our bodies work as a unit. The planet works as a unit. The universe works as a unit. Why would we be any different? And so, sort of backing up what you're saying, everything has to be in this sort of cohesion, this dance, this entanglement, if you will. And the pineal gland is, though it's important, every cell in our body and even our other bodies are important, and they all need to dance and shake hands together. Listen, I can't believe I'm looking at the clock. We're already 45 minutes in, at least since I pressed record. So I want to try to move it along a little bit. And by the
Okay,
way,
yeah,
I want to also,
let's move along. Absolutely. See,
yeah,
we can
I also
start
I
there.
also
We
wonder,
covered a
this is
lot
a
of groundwork there, which I think is
oh,
important. But
it's super important.
let's
All of
get
it's been fascinating.
let's get
Yeah.
to some of the more current stuff, right? Because
Okay.
you were talking in your thing about having these experiences where before you even hit the send button on your keyboard, you were getting messages back and things like that, right? And I mean, that's just absolutely wild, Alexis. I mean, it's like, and so you have to ask yourself, well, what could be the explanation for something like that? Without being absolutely woo-woo, right? And just saying, well, it's like outside of time and all this stuff. Yeah, there could be time jumps and these things could be part of it. But there has been, having laid down this foundation of 70 years of mind control experiments that have been going on, the introduction of artificial intelligence into the scenario, and it's particular the word you opened up with the sentient world simulation, right? This element has been out there trying to recreate an artificial version of our world for going on 20 years now. In fact, if Purdue started in 2006, you can be sure that they were already working on it years beforehand. And it was only that, they finally got the funding and they set up the lab in Purdue in 2006, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't already sort of well underway. And in fact, if you look at the documents in the servers of that intergalactic network I described to you, they actually already have URLs to some of their PDFs in 1960.
Wow.
Okay.
Not surprised. It's
So
crazy.
1960, huh? What? The internet wasn't even out until like 95 or something like that, right? So
Right.
how could that be, right? 35 years earlier, right? Well, there you go. That shows you that there's this other world out there, right?
Right.
We're
Well,
working
yeah.
on this stuff.
Sorry to interject, but I have to bring up Zbigniew Brzezinski, now long gone. It's been quite a few years, who wrote the book What? And I think in the early 70s. Help me with the title, and I know you know it. It's equally disturbing. In the early 70s, talking about the technocratic society and how we will invariably be controlled by. He didn't call it social media, but that's what he was describing. So we know that this.
Yeah. Well, now you know why these guys seem to be like, were they prophets? Did they have? Well, they had Looking Glass, but I mean, you now know that these guys were in those circles of people that were developing this technology. And like, if you look at this, right? This is something called the Body Area Network, right? And the Wide Body Area Network is a fact. Like, if you look at, there's a woman out there called Sabrina Wallace. She's a little, out there, but she puts a lot of really like far out information out there. And I traced some of her information into my research, and sure enough, there's this thing called Project Moldus, which is talking about how they were going to convert and create an interface between artificial reality and the biological human body using nanoscale interface technologies. They did this. They were doing this back in the 1990s, right? Here's one of their statements. This research will lay the foundation for advanced biology to digital converter systems that enable direct real-time conversion of biological signals into digital information. And of course, I would say, and vice versa, right? And here in Sandia Labs, 2008 again, they're talking about self-assembly holographic biosensors and biocomputers. So at a nano level, right? So we're talking going back 20 years earlier, before, the Beetlejuice phenomenon happened, that, essentially they're creating these things called low power transceivers, which they can insert on a nanoscale directly into our body, right? They begin to actually form into things, yeah, and they look like these are some of the schematics right out of their patents, right? So, and you can see, like, some of the way they actually grow in some of this material here. You can watch it. There's a guy called David Nixon who's been photographing these things in the blood tissue for the last couple of years, and it's shocking to see how they actually develop and build microprocessors within the bloodstream, right? So without freaking people out too much, there's a few pictures of it there. But
Wow.
I mean, this is kind of like, we're talking, this is where they're going.
Yeah.
And the only thing that's missing is some kind of an interface between artificial intelligence and our bodies. And that is it. And when I was looking at looking glass material, I realized that the evolution of the looking glass has moved from being these plasma interfaces to being an artificial intelligence interface hooked up to a glass fiber optic network that penetrates the entire network of the world. So all of us right now, I don't know about you over there where you are, but over here in Germany, they have fiberglass networks running pretty much right up to your house or right up to the
absolutely.
neighborhood,
It's here too.
right?
It's here too. Yeah.
So light speed transmission of data to and from you. So what happens, right? So you basically are taking in information, right? So they've got all these things like metaverse, right? And Apple Vision Pro. And with all these sensors, with the 40, 50 cameras and these devices, they are documenting your life, your reactions, every single thing that you are doing, they're documenting it. And they're working with it.
I have to bring it. Oh my God, this is chilling and such valuable information, Frank. Thank you so much. But I want to bring something up in that regard. Do you know that the other day, and I'm going to put do a little IG story kind of tied in with all of this. But the other day, admission, other passions of mine, interior design. I love decorating. And so I have like this little thing that I do almost every morning where I have my coffee, and rather than digging into this deep stuff, because I know I'm going to be getting there later in the day, there's an app that I use. I'm not going to name the app, but it's an app that I use on interior decorating. And I love to get inspiration and look at pictures. I do this so religiously almost every morning on the iPad. And I'm sure for those of you that have an iPad know that it will maybe have it'll store where you visit the most, just like when you're browsing the web. But this is an app. At the top of it may have been my iPhone, it said most visited when you're in this part of your home. So not only is it tracking the time that I'm doing, but it knew exactly where I was in my home when I'm surfing, which is in my family room.
Yes, we can do that.
Oh my God. Maybe I'm a little behind the time.
No, listen, Alexis, people don't want to believe this, and they don't really know.
I believe it.
I've got, I don't have it here. Actually, I should have thought of that, but I actually have a patent diagram of that technology that can basically see through walls.
Yes.
And they can tell exactly where, as soon as you're hooked up to a Wi-Fi modem in your house, boom, you're transparent. So I always tell people, wire your house. Don't use Wi-Fi, because you're basically, unless you don't care, unless you want to be,
a lot of people don't care. That's another issue that we're dealing with. A lot of people
don't care. And, and part of me is also like, look, I'm here now. I'm on this planet. I want to leave my mark. So I'm not afraid of leaving my mark everywhere and leaving my breadcrumbs. And hey, you want to check me out? You want to follow me and stalk me? Be my guest. You might learn something, right? I mean, you might be blown away, or you might try to interfere and make me stronger at trying to find ways to subvert the interference that's coming at us from all these directions. So I'm welcome. I'm down with it. I don't care. We can't hide. We can't hide from it anymore. It's out there. In fact, this stuff that I showed you, some of those visuals thereof, they're saying that because of the Beetlejuice, that's what's gotten into our bloodstream. But the alarming thing is, this is what David Nixon is finding out, It's even the people who have never drank from the
Yes.
partaken from the Beetlejuice ritual who have also got it in their system. So what do you say to that, right? I mean,
Right.
that's what
Yeah.
I'm talking about here, right? We
There's
can't
still
run.
it's still nebulous as to the degree or if this is happening. I mean, even some of the, obviously for the venue that we're on, we can't get too deep into it, but I think you can pretty much deduce, audience, what we're talking about. Absolutely. That being said, there are solutions, and and the work that you're doing obviously is getting us closer to making it a priority to find those solutions. So, we're going to have you back on for part 2. We're not quite done yet. We are, and we are going to go to the after show where we're actually going to be talking about, I want to talk about ChatGPT more. A couple of things I want to say about that. And I thought it would be kind of neat to have a conversation over there. I always point in this direction, next door, talking about the dangers of using ChatGPT, and do they outweigh the benefits or vice versa? So FYI, that's what we're going to be doing immediately after this main episode, is we're going to go over there and talk about that. But before we do, I'm going to give it another 15 or so minutes, and I want to throw a couple of things out at you, because you and I, again, had this robust conversation offline that really prompted me to talk about some of these things in my commentary. One of which is not so much the D-Wave quantum computer itself, but its inventor or co-inventor. I believe it was a group of people led by Geordie Rose. He's probably one of the most visible in this whole thing. You know, Frank, I found something, a couple of things about him that's very interesting. I want to see if I can look at it here in terms of his bio, and then also at the tail end of a talk that he gave at, I believe it was Wycliffe College in Toronto, on what it means to be human. I haven't seen the whole thing yet, but I want to bring this up. Let me I want to give the audience who maybe don't know who Geordie Rose is. So he founded D-Wave, the world's first quantum computing company. He was a CEO of Kindred, the world's first robotics company to use reinforcement learning in a production environment. He has sold quantum computers and robots to Google, NASA, Lockheed Martin, Gap, and several U.S. government agencies. Now, he was on a panel back in 2019, as I mentioned, at Wycliffe College, University of Toronto, part of the Religion and Society series called What Does It Mean to Be Human? And I want to read this to you, Frank, and see what you have to say about this. Now, I don't know, and I'm perhaps taking this a bit out of context, but when the panel moderator asked the panelists, particularly Geordie, to comment and give his advice on maintaining our humanity. Interestingly, this is what he said, and I'm just plucking some little nuggets out. He said, first piece of advice, if you have young children, restrict their stream use as much as you can and delay it as long as you can. He also said, your happiness derives from your relationship with the people that you can look in the eye physically, not your Twitter or Facebook friends. Stop using social media, etc. He also spoke about the importance of forgiveness and affection toward others. He was really putting emphasis on the human experience as being primary. But who is this person? Is this a contradiction?
Yeah, this is something I had no idea he said that, and
Yes, he
hearing you
did.
tell me that, hearing you say those words that he said, it you know, two things come to mind. First thing is that he is seen where the fruits of his work is leading, and it is not looking good for biological natural human beings, and he's now beginning to have second thoughts.
You think so? You think that's what it is?
That's one, right? The other is these people, like I talk about the archontic infection, as you know, which was mined out and worked out by Lash, but there's another word for it as well called Wetiko, or the
I was going to bring it up.
Carlos Castaneda talks about flyers. You know, there's other systems. You can find these things again and again, and it's a mind parasite. Essentially, it's a parasite which invades, and you have to understand this on a Toxoplasma gondii level. These things pass the blood-brain barrier, and they get into the neural networks that affect your dopamine levels. And dopamine systems in the body are all about reward and punishment. And so when you're, if we are to entertain this idea that this group of people have become infected with this parasitical element, which is sitting on humanity, it's amazing because they've done studies with Toxoplasma gondii where mice will actually run into the mouth of cats, just commit suicide. They'll just run right into their death, right? And if this is what's going on here, then a guy like Jordy saying those things, he might be saying that because part of him feels it, but another part of it is completely disconnected. And he knows that it doesn't matter if he says that anymore, because one thing I've come to believe is that a lot of these people in the WEF circles in this transhumanist world, Yuval Harari's and Schwab's and all these other people, they kind of feel overconfident. They feel that they've already succeeded in controlling and getting a complete grasp on humanity. And they're now molding it because, the idea of being gods, of being gods here in the physical body and overcoming the limitations of a physical body is prevalent in their ideology. And a guy like Jordy Rose, I mean, he supplies D-Wave computers to CERN, for example. And CERN is a place where a lot of experimentation is taking place, altering the magnetic field. And in and around the area that there's like a 40 kilometer circle, 27 kilometer circle that they generate magnetic fields. And so they're altering with magnetics. They're opening portals and accessing things for perhaps an archontic energy, need to look at that now, right? And it's all about pushing us out of this world. And another personality like Jordy, like saying things that seemingly are pro us, is whose initials are EM, and I'm pretty sure, I think you know who I'm talking about, who has, purchased one of the largest social media platforms on the planet, for billions and billions, and is claiming it to be like this new platform for interaction between humans, and makes all these assertions about being, in it for the right reasons and for the fight for humanity, etc. And yet at the same time is behind their backs developing all of the technology that will make an absolute slave race out of humanity, including an application which they call the Everything app. And the Everything app will then, of course, be tied into your biological ID, which will then be tied into some form of what they're hoping for, central banking digital programmable currency, where then you can no longer make cash anonymous purchases. You'll be bound to their system. Yeah. And so Jordy is in that circle. So I'm sorry. I mean, as much as it sounds like, hey, that sounds cool, I'm glad he said that. But
I was disturbed by it. I was disturbed just with the little bit that I knew. And you reminded me to look him up. I thought something's wrong here. Yeah. Something is completely wrong. So I'm with you. Listen, again, apologize for interjecting, but there's so many things to touch on here. The patterns that you're talking about, Frank, having to do with hypocrisy, paradoxical behavior, inversion. All of these things seem to be right on par with the hallmarks of archonic influence. These are the things. And also there's other words I'm not going to use actually, other influences that begin with an S and a D, let's just say, that have these hallmarks of confusion, chaos, paradox, inversion. And you talk about Wetiko. By the way, I interviewed Paul Levy, who wrote a brilliant book called Dispelling Wetiko quite a few years ago now. And it was really not only a page turner, but a mind twister. And yes, I would agree with you 100% that there is something definitely curious, to say the least, about this mind virus, what he calls malignant egophrenia, that has pervaded not only this level, but is seeking to influence the masses. And sadly is doing quite a good job. But it ain't over yet. Let's talk about the upside. What there's some good things happening here, like this conversation and the exposure of these sorts of things. Let's talk about the upside, and then I want to end with bringing in. I want to talk about the music industry before we hang up on this main call. But let's talk about the upside first. What are some of the good things you're seeing that could come out of this exposure? Namely,
well, I find that the only way to overcome this thing is to talk about it. And it's interesting. Another part of the the narrative, the creation narrative that the Gnostics put down was that when humanity and the anthropos blossomed on this habitat, they weren't designed to be able to deal with deception and secrecy and manipulation, which is part of the archontic element. They weren't designed to deal with archons. We weren't made for that. So, but what's interesting is that we have this ability to use our creativity and to put it into solving problems like no other creatures. It doesn't mean we're superior to all other creatures. We're human animals. Let's not, forget that, right? We're animals. We're biological, but we have these given inherent abilities that were passed along to us by our aeonic fathers, or whatever you want to call them. These are qualities which give us the ability to analyze, to look at things, and to creatively move past them. In fact, you could almost say that maybe the archontic or the Wetiko or whatever you want to call it influence is there to actually make us have an evolutionary leap, because we are actually designed to be able to do that. Instead of the cycle, right? We've seen this cycle again and again, right? Lemuria, Atlantis, right? And I can show you the cycle with relative to the sun cycles over time, thousands of years, how the rise and fall of civilization and even just our recorded history correspond to this kind of a repeated loop. But I think that the universe wants to get past that loop, just like us. And we are living as the universe. We are a force of nature. Let's not forget that. We tend to get caught in the idea that we're egos and persons with a name, but we're actually living through humanity. Like we are a force of nature, like wind is a force of nature, like water is a force of nature. We are a creative, powerful, intellectual, amazing ability group of people able to interlock and connect and form teams and solve problems like no one else, like nothing else. And this is what's happening right now. And I think one of the things people need to remember, we have a mainstream media out there, and the mainstream media is pitching the narrative of the transhumanists, basically, or the normie narrative, maybe using a derogatory term, people who are normalized to the idea that everything coming from the authority is to be taken seriously. But there's an alternative out there, an alternative media, and I'll know it's infiltrated and it's manipulated, and that too is a problem. However, one of the things that's a little bit unfair that we should always remember is that because of these factors and forces out there, they are not reporting on how many of us outside of that mainstream are organizing, are influencing, are affecting people out there in the world. And we are probably having a far greater effect than we would ever imagine if we were to listen just to the straight ahead transhumanist Klaus Schwab narrative. It almost seems like hands down they've won, but no, they haven't. And the fact is, their plans, as we see, if you start looking at this material like I have in my limited way, you realize they keep pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing. Why are they pushing if they have control? They don't have control. And so we should never forget that we are far more powerful than we believe we are. And even if you don't get anything done one day, just pick up the next day from where you left off the last time and realize that every little thing, first of all, given that you are going to take on a narrative, you're going to take on a role in this planetary evolution, working together with this Gaia, Sophia, Gaia, whatever you want to look at it as. It's been proven in Gaia theory that the Earth is a living being. So get into harmony with that living being, get into focus with it, and begin like a teamwork, And we didn't have time for it today. Maybe we can talk on that in another show about how the Earth itself is doing some amazing things on her part to block this archontic influence. And it's like we're partners with that being. And so we can take on a role, protagonist role in that partnership. So take up the role every day and try to get something done little by little, even if it's a little thing. As long as it's something, it makes a difference. And all of us collectively out there moving to change to put the pole back in favor of biological humanity, we're going to get there by just believing in ourselves and pushing along. And it ain't over until it's over. That's what I always say, right?
I love it. I think we need to end there because that's a powerful one. Thank you so much for that. We all need to be reminded each and every day. I did want to get to technology in the music industry, but I guess we need to do a part two. What do you think? Part two?
Yeah,
And
we need to
3
do
and 4. And
it.
next thing you know, we're going to be doing a show. Now he's going to be on so many shows as a host. He's a great segue. He is with John Nolan. I love John of Inspired, and you're now doing The Naked Truth with John. Tell us a little bit about that before we close, because it's good stuff. Good stuff.
Well, yeah, John and I began this association through the Looking Glass the chapter, where we explored that material, and we realized we have such a good rapport with one another that, hey, we should why don't we just meet on a regular basis and just, jam on some topics. And because there's so few people in the, in the talk circuit, in the mainstream, for sure, there's not many, but even alternative, there's like very few situations where people that are that really have a great connection, a powerful connection, can get together and can process stuff and work on stuff and talk about dialogues and narratives that are going out in the world and give it kind of another perspective and try to reach more people doing that.
Yeah. Well, you're doing a hell of a job. Kudos.
And I'll put a
both of
shameless
you.
plug in. People should go check out my time capsule for the Future Past webinar. If you want to go into this archontic story, and in terms of history, because we're noticing now that the historical narrative is wrong. And so I decided to embrace that narrative, and I applied the Gnostic perspective to it. It's totally out there. And that's my little shameless plug.
I was going to have you talk about your webinars because they're becoming your signature events. So please make sure that we have the link so we can put it in the description below, of course. Oh yeah, and I think that's an apt phrase, signature webinars. You just do stellar work and digging in, and you guys just got a sample, right, of how deep he goes. So Frank, this has been absolutely amazing. Now, the webinars, are they available vis-a-vis your website? Tell us what your website is.
Well, I have my website with my name. If you can't find the one with the webinars is called cyberhive.tv. And if you misspell that and you're not sure, just go to, if you can spell my name, frankjacob.com, then you can go there and you'll find links to everything there. So there's films, Tanya Maidenford, I mentioned her, Screen Addiction. We've been doing some films exploring consciousness, Solar Revolution, Klaus Donner Chronicles, which explores forbidden archaeology, Packing for Mars, which goes into the breakaway civilization stuff. So those are our themes. And we do that in films. The webinar thing has kind of been new because I realized it takes up to 5 years to finish a feature cinematic kind of film. Sometimes it's better to get the information out quick and dirty. And that's what the webinars have become. Although I'm a filmmaker and a multimedia artist, I tend to put a much more multimedia level into them. So there's audio snippets, film snippets, visuals. It's not just talking heads, right? It's a course based on state-of-the-art way of presentation of these topics. And so I can highly recommend people do it. They're not free, but they're not inaccessible in terms of, like some of the prices that are out there for things are wild, but these are like real courses. They're like solid. Like the latest one is a 7.5 hour long course.
Wow.
You can binge through a whole day, or you can do it over the course of a couple of days or a week. I guarantee you it'll open up some new pathways and new thoughts and provoke some new ideas. And it also should start a dialogue. So, that's why I created CyberHive as a platform, so that we can, post things, we can write, people can ask questions, and it's an ongoing dialogue. That's the intention of it. So those are the three areas that, the two areas that you can reach me at, and that's kind of where I'm at these days. And these shows, of course, these shows, we can do more too if you want. We can talk more.
I think we just made a deal on over the airwaves. You're coming back, man. You're coming back for sure. You see me smiling broadly from ear to ear. This is just such rich information. We will make sure you have all the links so you can get to Frank and maybe even meet him one day, because he's doing the tour and stuff too. Just came from Vienna and is going to be hopefully back at Contact in the Desert along with me, hopefully next year. So
I'm going to be at Arlington Institute in November. Actually, that's on the East Coast. So people want to come and see me in person. I'm going to be doing transition talks at the John Peterson's Arlington Institute.
We got a lot to link up to. So let me get to work on that now so we can get it out to you guys. Listen, Frank Jacob, this has been more than a treat, more than what I expected. It's just exceeded Wuten verwachen, beyond expectations. Absolutely. Listen, we're going to go next door. Did I say that right, by the way? Did I get that close?
You did, and actually I had some anxiety about all this information. How was it going to fit into an hour? And as we see, it didn't. But hey,
okay.
I threw some stuff at you, and I know that I probably provoked you a little bit, and I'm glad you were so kind and tolerant of my craziness so that I can continue this
crazy
dialogue.
like a fox. I love it. It's all good. All right, we're going to continue the quote unquote craziness. No, not at all. I'm not even going to joke about that. We're going to go deep next door, guys. Please come over to Patreon, sign up, join the membership. It helps Higher Journeys get the information out, grow and grow and grow. And there's some great stuff in the back catalog as well. So we're going to go over there right now. We're going to continue this conversation. We're going to be talking about the benefits or issues, let's just say, with using ChatGPT. It's a big subject these days. Let's go over and talk about it, Frank. Shall we? You ready?
Yep.
Okay.
But I
Thank
have to
you,
let
my
the
dear.
cat in the door.
Uh-oh, here we go with the kitty. I heard about that cat. All right, y'all. I'm going to sign off for now. Frank's preparing to go next door. We will talk to you soon. Thank you so much for joining us on Higher Journeys. Take care.